Welcome to Pioneer Mindset, a place where we challenge our mindset and address the discomfort in both business and life by finding clarity resulting in bold conviction. I'm your host, Garrett Ruskamp, fifth generation farmer, husband, and father from rural Nebraska. Whether you're navigating frustration from past decisions or worry about the uncertainty you face today in your business, we're going to learn from our struggles and take on new challenges with a resilient mindset. Join me as I share my journey of struggles I faced in agriculture as a farmer and family man. I'm ready to dive into honest conversations to tackle the mindsets surrounding key issues that rural ag business owners face that will ultimately help you gain control, leading to a profitable and sustainable business. Let's adapt to Pioneer Mindset and get to it. Welcome back, everyone, to this week's episode. I think this is going to be a really valuable one. We're going to be talking about money and profits. And speaking of valuable episodes, go give the last 3 episodes a listen. They were guest episodes. So we look back, we had episode 82 with Coach John talking about resiliency and goals. And then we had episode 83 with Landon Schaefer talking about all things crop insurance. And then finally, we rounded it out with episode 84, Zane Abner talking about marketing and talking about how we can protect ourselves, right? And so those are really 3 very good, valuable episodes with guests that I had to bring on and kind of bring on their knowledge to the podcast. So as we talk about today's episode, could we talk about money? Obviously, we all find money valuable, right? That's why we're seeking it so much. And so talk about money, talking about profits within our business. And so I'm excited to dive into this week's episode and this conversation, right? And so at first, I was kind of really thinking about what am I going to talk about this week? Well, as I was thinking through that, I've been spending a lot of time the last week or so. And as we record this, I'm sitting at beginning of September. And this is generally the time of year where I starting to make decisions into next year, talking about looking into next year's crop, 2026 rate. I'm starting to look at, hey, are we going to be maybe prepaying some expenses, prepaying chemical or even fertilizer, looking at fertilizer prices. Are they a good buy now? What should we be doing here? And in order to do that, in order to make some of those decisions, I first need to take a step back and be like, all right, I need to first have a crop plan in place for next year, right? Now, if you're strictly just a corn, soybeans, 100% rotation, and some extent, that's just kind of flip-flopping back and forth. Your acre's always the same. You don't really pick anything up. It all stays the same. Nothing really changes there from your crop plan standpoint. But for us, we're, maybe doing some wheat acres, some rye acres, maybe got some alfalfa we're going to be putting in or taking out. Maybe we've got some corn on corn we want to look at doing. And in order to make those decisions, I got to first have that crop plan. All right. But in order to have that crop plan, in order to, like I said, decide, am I going to go some corn on corn this year? Is that going to be a good move? Right. How many acres of wheat or small grains do I want to have? Should I plant some alfalfa? Right. Or whatever those decisions are. In order to make that decision, I first got to figure out, okay, what's going to be profitable? Is the alfalfa going to be more profitable? Do I want to have more acres of corn or more acres of soybeans? What does that actually look like? So in order to make that decision, I got to put the legwork in and figure out, okay, what's my break even going to be? What's my cost of production going to be looking into next year? Kind of doing those projections ready, right? And sometimes in order to put that projection together, I actually need to have actual information from 2025. Because in most cases, that's going to be the best starting information to put together our projections into next year, right? To have an idea, okay, what did I spend on this crop this last year? It's going to be at least a starting place to figure out where am I going to be next year, right? So all of this kind of comes into play. If I'm going to start prepaying my fertilizer, in order to do that, I got to have my crop plan. In order to have my crop plan, I got to have my cost of production to break even for projections for next year. In order to do that, I actually have to have my actuals in place for this year. So a lot of things need to kind of transpire in order to do our due diligence and make the best decisions possible. So that's why generally kind of the end of August, 1st of September is a really good time of year. Maybe it's a tick slower on the farm for row crop operations before we get into the busyness of harvest. And so it's kind of a really good time of year to be proactive and start really focusing on some of these different things. So why now? Why do we care about taking the time to do this now? Like, I've been working my butt off all summer. Why do I need to actually focus on the numbers, right? Aren't they just going to kind of take care of themselves? Or why do I need to do this now? Why now? And why do you actually even care, right? Well, if you're not profitable, then what are we all doing this all for, right? And so I went through all this legwork to figure out, in 2025, were we profitable? All right. In 2026, are we going to be profitable? So we ask ourselves, if we're not profitable, then what are we all doing this for? Just gonna tell your wife that you're gonna be gone all these hours, but we're not gonna have anything to show for it, or just busting our tail to go backwards. I feel like these are a lot of things that are kind of coming up for us when we talk about 2025 being a pretty rough year, 2026 not looking any different, right? So thinking to ourselves, why do we need to actually be profitable? And if you're not profitable, the sooner you know, the more proactive you can actually be, right? Like I said, we think about 2026. In most cases, I'm going to say if we go ahead and build out a plan, aside from any government payments, right, we're probably not going to be profitable. Just looking at where fertilizer prices are, inputs are, where the price of corn and soybeans are, commodity prices, whatever you're raising, it does not look good. We're probably not going to be profitable. All right. So the sooner you know that, the more proactive the plan you can make. Maybe I decide to make some shift in my crop plan, right? Like we're talking about here. Maybe I plant something different. Maybe I take a risk and I plant something that's actually not not going to be insured by crop insurance. Maybe it's maybe more of a niche market. Maybe it's the year to do that, right? But if we don't know our profitability right now for next year, or even for this last year, for instance, we can't make the best decisions possible. We don't have the best information possible to make those decisions. So that's why the sooner you know, the more proactive you can actually be. All right. Now, let's actually read the map to try to figure out where we're going instead of just flying blind and hoping we make it. That's the big thing here. That's the big phrase I want to take home. I'm going to say it one more time. All right. Let's read the map to figure out where we're going instead of just flying blind, hoping we make it there. All right. So that's why I think it's important to talk about profit today. And in order to talk about profit, we got to ask ourselves, well, what is profit? Profit is the money left over after all expenses have been paid. And I mean all expenses, right? We're not just being like, well, I'm going to figure profit before these expenses, right? No, we want to talk about all expenses. At the end of the day, when you're working your butt off, when you're working all hours throughout the busy season and the non-busy season, whatever the case is, missing ball games, maybe being home late at night, missing bedtimes, missing supper time with the wife and kids and all that stuff, when you're sacrificing all that stuff, we want to make sure at the end of the day, we're accounting for everything. That way we can come home at night. We can tell our wife that, this is not very fun, but this is maybe what I'm working for. This is the profit that I'm going to be showing after working my butt off, right? After doing the best that I can do, this is what's left, right? This is what's left over, okay? And then with that, hopefully the goal here is to be profitable. We want to have something left to show for all of this hard work. All right, so we got to ask ourselves, what is profit? Well, it's the money left over after all expenses are paid. And then we got to ask ourselves, okay, well, how are we going to actually track that? Okay, there's so many moving parts in and out of our operations, Garrett. How do we actually track this? I mean, I've got so many different line items, so many different expenses going out, so many moving parts. It's hard to know whether I'm actually profitable or not. And sometimes we don't know. In most cases, I'd say a lot of farmers and ranchers do not actually know whether they're profitable or not. They're basing their profitability, their success, whatever the case is, based on maybe what the banker says, based off of how they feel when they look at their bank account, whether there's money there or not, or just based off of all these things that are probably not necessarily true. So how do we actually track this? Now I'm going to go back to this phrase that we've all heard before. You cannot manage what you don't measure. And so that's why in order to manage the profitability, in order to make the best decisions possible and manage our operation versus letting it manage us, right, and control us, we got to have a way to do this. And so there's lots of different tools out there and lots of different ways to actually look at this. And I kind of want to really quick kind of dive into that. And so when we talk about, profit, right, the big thing that kind of comes to mind is maybe a profit and loss statement. And in some cases, if you're utilizing like a QuickBooks or maybe like an Anbrook or maybe just even a notebook or Excel spreadsheets, whatever the case is, we come to mind with like a profit and loss statement. On QuickBooks, for example, I'm going to kind of stick with that one there because a lot of people utilize QuickBooks in their operations. One of the reports that you can actually run is a profit and loss report, and you can print off a profit and loss statement. But the one thing that we've got to ask ourselves is there's a couple different ways that we can analyze this information, right? This is where we start getting into the weeds a little bit, where people maybe start getting a little bit confused. And that's where I'm here today to hopefully kind of clarify some of this, make sure that we understand. This is all kind of about understanding this information, right? So when we talk about maybe some different accounting systems that are out there, well, maybe you get a profit and loss statement from your accountant, or maybe you get the profit and loss at the end of the year when your taxes are filed. Well, at the end of the day, when it comes to accounting, there's a couple different ways that we can manage this profit or loss. We can look at things from a cash basis versus an accrual basis. All right. So what does that actually mean? What are those two? What's the difference, right? Well, cash accounting basically records the revenue and expenses when cash actually changes hands, or basically kind of that in and out of your account. So every time money flows into your account and money leaves your account, that's basically on a cash basis. But it's very simple to manage, but at the same time, it can be misrepresentative of the overall health of a financial position. And because it just kind of depends on when you're looking at that, kind of depends on when you're looking at that snapshot in time. Maybe you've got a bunch of bills that are going to be due after that. So it's a little bit deceiving because you have all this cash in your account, right? Or maybe the account is drained because we haven't sold cattle, or we haven't sold the grain yet. So that's from a cash standpoint, that's cash accounting. Now let's look at accrual accounting. This basically records income once it's earned and the expenses once they are incurred, regardless of when the cash is actually kind of exchanged or moves hands there, right? So it's maybe a little bit more complex, maybe a little bit hard to calculate, but this really gives us a very clear picture of the overall financial performance at any given time, right? It doesn't matter if we're looking at before we sell the crop or after, or when we pay our bills or after, right? So this gives us a really good example there. And I like to think of this as in terms of the cash accounting versus accrual accounting. Cash is going to be simply a cash flow statement, right? And how we utilize cash flow statements within Pioneer Farmer and the clients that we help is we got some different tools. I'm gonna dive into this in a second, but just to lead into it is we utilize a cash flow that allows us to track our actuals and projections throughout the entire month, each month of the year, right? Each month of your fiscal year. And that's on a cash standpoint. We want to know anytime that money comes out of your account or comes into your account, right? We want to make sure that we know if I got a term principal payment that's leaving my account, I know that how that affects me, right? I see that leaving my account. I need to know how that affects me. But on the same token, when we talk about accrual accounting, sometimes that's actually, I relate that more to like a balance sheet. All right. So if we're looking at a balance sheet and we're taking it into account, okay, I've got all these accounts receivable. All right. That's a really, really good example. I got accounts receivable. Maybe I did some custom drilling. I did some custom trucking. I did some custom combining. For whatever reason, somebody owes me money, but I have not been paid for it. It has not hit my account yet. So we still want to account for that. We still want to make sure we know those values, right? So we're going to keep track of that as an asset on the balance sheet. Same thing for the liabilities. Maybe I've got accounts payable that are out there due where I got to pay for fertilizer, seed, chemicals, whatever the case is. Those are going to be coming due, but they haven't actually left my account yet. So that's why we utilize things like a balance sheet to help us on an accrual accounting standpoint, right? Now, you're probably thinking, well, why are you talking about balance sheet when we're supposed to be talking about cash flow? Well, that's just how I can kind of envision accrual accounting. I kind of bring it back to more of a representative of a balance sheet, right? That's just kind of how my mind works, a little bit easier to think about that, right? Now, I want to ask you this. In your opinion, which do you think bankers actually prefer? Do you think they prefer kind of on a cash standpoint or an accrual standpoint? Which do you think? And to be fair, this is a trick question because they want both. They want both at some point in time or another. And I think bankers, it's good to know kind of the information that they need, that they use to make the decisions within, their business as well. Banking is a for-profit institution. We got to know this, but they basically take in this information, use it as a way to judge, okay, is this going to be a good kind of a loan to make here? Are they going to be able to repay this? What does this look like from a cash standpoint? Are they strong? Are they weak? What does that actually look like, right? And so from there, like I said, it's a trick question because they need both. They're going to want to know their actuals, which is basically your cash, right? So they're going to know, okay, when they meet for line of credit renewal, I need to see a profit and loss statement is on a cash basis. They need to know everything that kind of came and went throughout the last year, right? And they want to know that on your actuals, which is basically on a cash basis. But they also want to know what's your projections moving forward, okay? From that point on, what's your projections, which is more of an accrual basis, right? And so that's where we're going to kind of dive into this a little bit and like, well, which one do I need to do right here? Do I manage them both? Do I need to keep two sets of books? And what does this actually equate to? So that's why I want to dive into this. And so actuals is just like it sounds, right? It's actual transactions that have come in and out of your account, cash income and expense statements, right? basically your actuals are going to be, how did you do this last year? It tells a story as to how your operation did in the last 12 months or whenever you're giving the statement to them. Okay. And so the projections, we use that to build out projections for next year, right? That's where we paint the picture going into next year, right? How do you think we're going to do? How do we think that things are going to actually play out? And that's why they're called projections, because we don't actually know, but we have to have a starting place and we have to use those to paint the picture into the future. Now we ask ourselves, what does the bank actually need? Why do they need this information and what do we need to give them? And so every time, if any of you have gone through a line of credit renewal, you probably know the standard information that they need. There's 3 big components that they need in order to renew a line of credit. 1, they need an updated balance sheet. 2, they need a cash flow, but that cash flow is going to be actuals along with projections. Okay. Generally, they're going to be a little bit more concerned as to what things look like moving forward because we can't always change the past, but we want to paint that picture like I just mentioned before. The third one is tax return, right? The tax return. And in some cases, the tax return is actually the actuals, all right? The tax return is a way to basically tell them the story of what the past year was. And sometimes that's exactly why the bankers need it, is because they got to make sure that they have your tax return on file. So that way, in the event that they actually get audited, they can show that I've got the tax returns for all their clients, right? That's why they actually need it. But the tax return is going to kind of paint that picture from, like I said, last year's fiscal year, right? And so, but as we move forward here and we get to talking about profit, you're probably asking yourselves, man, why did we dive down this rabbit hole? All of a sudden, we're talking about balance sheets and cash flows. What does the banker need? What does that have to do with profit? I'm focused on profit, that buzzword that everybody wants more of, right? Well, are we going to basically what the bank needs to know when it comes to all of this information, the balance sheet, the cash flow, all of this information, is they want to know, are you going to be able to generate enough money to cover all of the expenses, which basically goes back to profit. How profitable are you going to be in your operation? That's what they want to know whenever it comes to meeting with them and whenever you bring about this new business venture, whatever the case is, they want to know, is it going to be profitable? Or are we just basically buying this guy a job, right? Is this guy just like to stay busy and doesn't care how much money he comes back to with or whatever? So they actually want to know, okay, are we going to be able to generate enough money to cover all the expenses? Basically, are they going to be profitable? And so that's from a banker standpoint. That's kind of the information that they need and how they're looking at things, right? Now, what does the business owner actually need? So what does the business owner need, whether you're going into your bank for a line of credit, a new business venture, want to buy a piece of ground, want to expand or whatever the case is, or you're just going in there to update things and kind of keep that relationship strong, kind of building that 5 C's of credit, that character, that first one there as we get into some hard times. Whatever the case is, what does the business owner actually need? And what do they actually need to make the best decisions possible and manage their money, right? And actually manage their business. Okay. So the business owner, kind of similar, but they're going to need a balance sheet. Okay. That's pretty standard. But then let's talk about the cash flow. The cash flow, they're going to need actuals and projections. That's why I go back to the different tools that we utilize within Pioneer Farmer, one of those being Farmer Metrics, which is a tool that we can help manage the cash flow. We can manage cash because we've always heard cash is king. So we want to manage it as such. We want to be very diligent about our cash flow and all the money coming in and all the money leaving our account, right? So we manage actuals and projections side by side on a month-by-month basis. But along with that, we also want to keep track of a cost of production. And that's really what we're going to get into here. That cost of production is a way just to figure out, what is our break-even price? Are we going to be profitable? And that cost of production is going to probably be more associated with like an accrual type of counting, an accrual type of management, if you will. Okay, because we want to know, okay, if we're growing this next year's crop, looking at 2026, are we going to be profitable? What's our cost of production actually going to be? All right. So by figuring out this information, and this kind of goes back to, like I said before, where I was trying to work through these different things I needed just to make my decisions for going into 2026, had to put the pen to the paper and do all of the kind of the hard work, the legwork that we don't always like to do in order to make the best decisions possible. So one of those critical components that we're going to have to manage is that cost of production, and having a way to actually figure out that number. All right. So what that's going to help us do is answer this question. Are we going to be profitable? How do we become more profitable? Or what are we going to do if we're not profitable? And so those are kind of the three questions that we're going to ask ourselves in order to kind of make the best decisions possible. And so, it kind of goes back to that phrase before, you can't manage what you don't measure. And so we're going to finally have the tools we can to measure this and to do the best we can to manage that. All right. So we need to have the right tools in order to do this. And so that's why I want to talk about some different tools that we utilize. And at the end of the day, I do want to preference that this is all about finding a system that works for you. I'm going to talk about a tool or a spreadsheet specifically that I've developed, kind of honed it over the last few years, and that's worked very well for our operation to basically manage this cost of production, this profitability analysis, this break-even analysis, whatever the hell you want to name this thing, right? I'm going to dive into that, the different tools that we utilize. But once again, you kind of just find something that works for you, whether it's a software program, whether that's a spreadsheet, whether that's a pen and paper, I don't care. It just has to be easy to use, easy to update, so that way we can get the information that we actually need to make the best decisions possible. I keep coming back to that. I don't want to bore you with that, but that's ultimately what we're trying to do here. So I'm going to kind of dive in and share a little bit about how I go about this process. Obviously, you can't see this. Obviously, I'm just kind of talking. Hopefully, this kind of all makes sense to you. But at the end of the day, the tool that we've developed, the spreadsheet that we utilize, we call enterprise analysis. And the reason we call it that is because in most cases, we have different enterprises that we're trying to manage. Maybe it's a row crop operation that works in conjunction with the livestock operation. So it's diversified. So you got different enterprises there, different income streams. So I've created this so that way we can help maybe kind of split out the two, make sure we know which ones are actually profitable and really dive into that and know the true break even and cost of production for each of those different enterprises. So we're going to talk specifically first, starting with row crops, as this is the time of year that I'm making the decisions on row crops for 2026 or for next year, right? So with this, basically this enterprise analysis, it's going to be, the first part of this is pretty simple. Just trying to figure out, what's kind of my cost reduction going into the crop. In order to figure that out, I'm going to start with the income first. Income's just always kind of on top, kind of that top line item there. So that's pretty standard. Let's just kind of start with the different crops that we raise. And then we're going to figure out, okay, how many acres of that we're going to have? What's our projected yield? And for yield, I generally am conservative when I'm going into next year until I know what the crop's going to make. I just kind of use my APH guarantee, my crop insurance guarantee. All right. That's just kind of helped me sleep at night, so we can dial that in as much as possible. And then from there, we can kind of do our total bushels. What's the price that we're kind of putting on there? Maybe we're doing some hedging, so we have an idea what that looks like. Maybe this is using like a spring crop insurance price, just trying to get a rough idea what the price is there. And then for there, we can just kind of figure out total revenue, right? So do that for all the different crops we have, whether corn, soybeans, wheat, alfalfa, whatever the case is. Right, from there, we also want to make sure we calculate any additional income as well. So maybe you do some custom work, right? Or maybe you've got some rental income. We want to know what other income might we have besides just the income from the crops. And so that's another place that we can put that in there. And we just got to make sure we account that in one shape or another. And so then now we're going to dive into the expenses, the part that we probably don't always like to do, but we need to get really detailed with. So I break this up into kind of two different categories, so to speak. So we've got kind of the variable expenses and then more of the fixed expenses, right? So the variable expenses are going to be the ones that change on whether I have 500 acres of corn or 800 acres of corn. And that's what's really going to be dialed in, so that way we can try to figure out which one of these is more profitable, all right? So we've got the corn, and we're going to put in all of the inputs that go strictly into that crop. And we're going to dial in. Maybe we got for lime, we spread some lime. Maybe that was $15 an acre, or maybe our herbicide cost was $26 an acre for our pre, and maybe it was $32 an acre for the post, or whatever the case is. So I'm going to go down the line for each of those, whether it be your nitrogen, your sulfur, manure, your micros, your seed costs, crop insurance, any other custom hire, whether it be planting, spraying, combining, custom application, drone application, whatever that is. We want to calculate all of those for each of your different crops that you're raising. Once again, whether it be corn, soybeans, wheat, alfalfa, does not matter. We want to factor all of those. And so just kind of keep moving here. Those are going to be kind of the variable expenses. And then we're going to dive into the fixed expenses. Now, the fixed expenses probably aren't going to change a lot. Yes, they might change a little bit if you pick up an extra quarter or two of ground, whatever the case is. But for the most part, they're probably not going to change a lot. That's to where I like to just have a starting point and use my actuals from the previous year as projections, as a starting place going into next year. All right. So that's where like this tool here specifically, this spreadsheet, it makes it really easy because I can just basically make a copy, rename the title of it from 2025 actuals to 2026 projections. And all of a sudden I've got a starting place, right? So how we actually go about doing this is we're going to calculate for, if you pull up that profit and loss statement, like I mentioned before, all the categories that go into your QuickBooks, all the categories that your accountant needs when it comes to filing your taxes. Let's use those same categories to keep this easy, keep this simple to calculate this information, right? So maybe it's crop expenses. I've got maybe 15,000 there. Maybe I've got equipment repairs is 50,000. Maybe I've got gas, fuel, and oil is maybe 30,000 or 25,000, or maybe my legal is 2,500, or maybe you got rent that goes into that. We could calculate that either here or variable expenses. A couple different ways we can do that one. Or you got supplies, utilities, payroll. We are factoring everything in here, by the way. Payroll, maybe in your case, it's return to management. We want to make sure that we have something to account for all the time we put into this, right? And then, by the way, any term debt, we want to make sure that we account for everything in here. So we put all that information in here. And then what I do with this specifically when it comes to the row crop side of things is I take my total number of acres that those expenses would have come from, okay, that they would have come from. And that's where I divide that out per acre. And then I can kind of get on a per acre basis. I can roughly figure out for my gas, fuel, and oil, or I can figure out for each of those different categories, what's my expense per acre. But at the end of the day, I just want to know, okay, what's the total of those fixed expenses? What's my total per acre? So let's just throw out a number here. Maybe it's 200,000 that this number comes down to. And then we divide that by our total number of acres. And then that's going to get basically our fixed expense per acre. And we're going to add that back to the variable expense per acre, per crop, okay, per crop. And then that's just the way that I figure it. So that way I can come up with the total cost of production, total expense per acre. That way I know at the end of the day, I've got, $900 into corn, or I've got $500 into beans, or I've got $400 into alfalfa, whatever it is. I know at the end of the day, what's my cost of production per acre. And by the way, it's the same thing when it comes to livestock. We're trying to do the same thing. We can break this out into different classes of livestock, and we can figure out what's going into each of those different classes, but then also take these fixed expenses and divide that out per head that we are actually managing, right? And so we can definitely go into as much detail as possible, but the big picture here is we're trying to figure out, are we going to be profitable? We know what our cost of production is. We know we got $900 into this corn, but we know that our revenue per acre, when we do that math above, like I said, coming back to the income side of things, maybe that's only $850 per acre. So we're at a net negative $50 per acre. And so that's the number we're trying to come down to, that profit and loss per acre, that number that's going to help us determine, okay, should we make this fungicide application? Should we dial back our fertilizer? Should we maybe even look at spending some money on the right soil test to try to figure out, maybe we can cut back in some certain areas? Hint, hint, I got a future episode coming up with that as well, so stay tuned. But that's one that when we come back to this cost of production, this break-even analysis, this tool that we're trying to utilize to figure out if we're going to be profitable or not, this is the tool that we're trying to make better decisions with, right? These are the tools that we're going to want to show the bank versus them taking your acres, your crop plan, and your actuals from last year and just trying to guesstimate something that's going to look pretty and get your loans approved. Oh, did I just say that? Oh, yeah, I did actually. They're trying to do the best they can to get those loans approved for you. Don't get me wrong, we're the ones asking for the money. But as business owners, we want to do our due diligence and make sure that we are doing our own homework, putting our own pen to paper, and being responsible for the numbers. So nobody knows your operation better than you do. That's why it's best for you as the business owner to put together these projections, to put together, this could be called a cash flow, because a cash flow, really at the end of the day, just covers so many different things. And that's why when I'm thinking about this episode, we talk about a cash flow. Well, what the hell is that? Well, we talk about the flow of money. Well, is that on an accrual basis or a cash basis, or what does that actually mean? So there's multiple different ways that we can analyze a cash flow, multiple different ways that we can figure out, are we profitable or not, I should say. Do we generate enough money to cover the expenses? That's ultimately what this comes down to. And so this is just one tool that we utilize with this enterprise analysis to help us calculate that information, to help us figure out what can we adjust. Now that we've measured it, now how do we manage it? What can we cut? What can we add? Can we do something different? Can we do a better job marketing? Can we figure out what our break even is per bushel and use that, take that to a marketing advisor and help him guide him as to getting the best price possible or getting closest to our break even in a really negative year, right? And this is the information, once again, kind of coming full circle here. Why are we having this conversation now? This is the information that if we at least have a starting place going into the year, I'm going to go back to that phrase that I said before. All right, talking about, let's read the map to figure out where we are going instead of just trying to fly blind and hope we make it. We all hope that we make it into next year, that we're profitable in 26. We all know hope isn't a business plan. So that's why we're trying to do the things that we can to be proactive, to put these tools in place, to implement them, to do that homework, to put the pen to the paper, to be responsible as business owners, to make the best decisions possible, right? And that's what we're trying to do here. Now, as we get to rounding this out, I know I talked a lot here and you're probably thinking just rattling off numbers, right? But the big thing here is I just wanted to kind of give you an example, kind of showcase roughly how we come up with our cost of production, how we manage the different cash flows out there to make sure that we are trying our best to be profitable. So we have a way to measure our money and manage it the best that we can. So first off, as we get to rounding this out, I want to mention, do not, as I sit here and rattle all this off, do not get overwhelmed, right? Because if you're trying to figure out how you can actually do this yourself, the big thing here is you just got to start, right? Truthfully, I'm a numbers guy. This spreadsheet works very well for us, but every time I dive into it, sometimes I do get overwhelmed myself. I'm sitting here trying to figure out, man, I got 10 other things I should be doing outside. Yes, it's a slower time. Yes, I've got a few minutes I should spend in the office, but I'm trying to figure out, sometimes it gets overwhelming when we try to embark on trying to get this information that we actually need. So the first thing is, don't get overwhelmed, but just start. Just start diving into it. Try to do your best to make sense of it and to work yourself through it, because that's what happens to me is I get overwhelmed, but as I start and I take some action, I start plugging some numbers in and I start getting creative and I start figuring out what's going to work best for me. All of a sudden I find myself and I'm working into it and I get excited because I'm getting in a group and I'm getting the numbers that I want to see, or at least I'm making progress and I'm being proactive and doing the things that I need to make the best decisions possible. Then it all starts to come a little bit easier, right? And using the tools that are out there that are actually going to work best for you. Okay, that's the big one there, whether it be enterprise analysis, like I mentioned before. Hit me up at Pioneer Farmer if you want to learn more about that, or how you can maybe even develop something that works best for you. Maybe talk about some other different tools out there that might work best for your operation. Just use the tools that are out there because there's a lot of them, okay? The last one here that I want to mention, and this is a really big take home here, is as we get to talking about this, is we get to thinking about 2026, it's pretty easy to get into a scarcity mindset. Like, hell, maybe 2025 was a rough one for you. Maybe you're suffering from a drought. Maybe the prices are terrible. Maybe you didn't do any forward contract and you're looking at a negative 45 base and we just don't know what the hell is going to play out, right? It's pretty easy for those stories to kind of compound in your mind, and they get pretty negative and they get pretty dark, and it's pretty hard to work yourselves out of that sometimes. Believe me, I get it. I've been there. And so part of how we go about killing those, just part of this, right? How do we kill that scarcity is by asking ourselves, what are the facts, right? What are the numbers? What are the numbers actually showing us? I was thinking back in 2025, part of this process was me putting in our actuals for 2025. By doing so, and just the way that the year played out, just the way that we've been fortunate to catch a few rains, our crop looks pretty decent. We have had some government payments, which is going to help us. All of a sudden, I get to figuring out, what is my actual break even? What's my profit and loss per acre? And it was positive this year. And we don't always know that going throughout the year. We just think in our heads, we hear all these stories, we see everything on Instagram. We just don't know if we're just going on by what everybody else says, right? And so that's why we got to ask ourselves, what are the facts? So we kill that scarcity. And then we look at 2026. Once again, let's be proactive. If we think it's going to be a rough one, what can we do to actually try to be profitable? What can we do to take advantage, maybe some different marketing opportunities out there, maybe some different volatility to add to our bottom line there, to add to that price? What can we do to maybe cut back on here? And we don't know that if we don't know what our starting point is. So that's why at the end of the day, use the facts to kill scarcity. So I hope that there was value in this. Obviously we're talking about money, so there's value somewhere, right? But I hope for you, there's take home here that we can just do the best we can, maybe spend a little bit of time here before things get super busy into harvest. Maybe you're already hard at it. Maybe there's no chance that you're getting in the office now. maybe at the end of the day, this is just an episode that gives you something to look forward to at a rainy day or whenever you get a chance, whenever you park a combine, as we start focusing on next year's crop, because farmers are eternal optimists. We're in this for the long haul, and we're just trying to do the best we can. And so these are some different things that we are doing within our operation, within the clients that we're helping them focus on this time of year as we get to thinking about next year. So I hope there's value in this, but for now, that's all I got. We'll catch you guys next time. Thanks for tagging along with me today as we sharpened our mindsets. If you've gained insight from today's episode, be sure to take a screenshot to share or send this episode to somebody who might also find value in it. For more, follow me on Instagram at Garrett Ruskamp or on Facebook, and join me next time for more conviction through clarity.